Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud. Well, stoned. In this video, we're going to start a new Little Blue book, and it is Little Blue book number 86, and it is titled On Reading, an essay. And it's an essay by George Brandis. And I thought, well, who's George Brandis? And why did he get to write the Little Blue book on reading? Well, first I can show you a picture of the gentleman. Let me turn in here, and then I'll give you a little description, because I feel it's only right to hear why this man, George Brandis, was chosen to write Little Blue book number 86 on reading. And here's what I found, thanks to some Google searches and AI. George Brandis was one of the most influential literary critics and intellectuals in 19th century Europe, an essential figure in shaping modern thought in Scandinavia. Born in 1842 in Copenhagen, Brandis came from a Jewish family and grew up immersed in literature, philosophy, and political debate. He's best known for launching what became known as the modern breakthrough in Scandinavian literature. In a series of lectures starting in 1871, Brandis famously argued that literature should serve a social purpose. It should confront real issues like gender equality, class struggle, and political freedom, rather than retreat into romanticism or abstract idealism. His motto was that literature must put problems under debate. Brandis was a fierce advocate of realism and naturalism, and his ideas deeply influenced writers like Heinrich Ibsen and August Strindberg. He also introduced Danish audiences to thinkers like Nietzsche and Darwin, helping usher in a new era of secular, critical, and socially engaged thought. Despite, or maybe because of, his radical views, Brandis often found himself at odds with academic institutions and conservative critics. But his voice remained strong throughout his life, shaping intellectual debates far beyond Denmark. He died in 1927, but his call for art to engage real life still resonates powerfully today. And that is why George Brandis was chosen to write Little Blue book number 86 on reading. So, without further ado, let's see. Oh, this is copyright 1905, and then is published in the Pocket series by arrangement with Duffield and Company. So this is a republication of it. Still, this is why this one was chosen. All right, here we go. On reading. Oh, pardon me. Let's hydrate first. Hydrate, Maddie. And let's see what the literary critic and genius had to say on reading. A few years ago, several European newspapers offered prizes for a list of the best 100 books for a first-class library. The answers poured in: the Bible and Robinson Crusoe, Homer and Horace, Dante and Shakespeare, Holberg and Holpenschlager, Goethe and Mickiewicz, Racine and Pascal, Arani and Petroffi, Cervantes and Calderon, Bjornson and Ibsen, Tegner and Rundberg. Each lists characteristics of the country and the individual taste of the correspondent. It is childish to suppose that 100 books can be named of those which are the best for each and every one. The simplest experience of the world proves that a work of great excellence may deeply move one person, while it leaves another untouched, and that a book which has influenced one strongly in one's youth may lose such influence over one's later years. There is practically nothing that every man can read at every time. This fact is not particularly evident, of course, for the simple reason that nowadays very few people can be said to read at all, or enjoy reading, or get any good out of it. That's a shame. The capacity of reading becomes extinct since all possess it. Wait, that doesn't make sense. The capacity of reading becomes extinct since all possess it. I guess that's what it says. One of 100 persons able to read, 90 generally read nothing but newspapers. A species of reading which demands no exertion, and where the articles which crave racking of the brain are simply passed over. They who read more than newspapers read as a rule in such a way that they might exactly as well not read at all. Everyone will recall such remarks as the following. Remember, this is written in the 1920s. There's no use talking to me about this book or that book. I must have read it, I suppose, some years ago, but I have the unfortunate faculty of forgetting everything I read. Most people read without any particular attentiveness. Perhaps, too, they select reading matter which does not deserve any particular attention. But it is a matter of fact that they forget what they read. Many people, after all, are not accustomed to understand fully. They are like young people reading books in foreign languages who neglect to refer to the dictionary for words they do not understand. They infer them from the sense, so they say. That is, they understand half and are content with that. In the case of works, the nature of which is not intended to be grasped by the intellect, as, for example, in lyric poetry, readers generally relinquish beforehand all idea of understanding exactly what the author means. An acquaintance of mine in a company of ladies once tried to experiment of reading aloud Goethe's, Goethe's, I can't say that word sometimes, The God and the Bayandere? I don't know. Beginning each stroke with the last line and reading upwards. The rhymes fell without intermission. All the melody of the verses was retained, and everyone was charmed with the following. Then by her, with grace, is the nosegay bestowed, well skilled in its mazes, the sight to entrance, the cymbal she hastens to play for the dance, and his house is love's abode. Reflecting a little upon this and similar phenomena, one readily finds oneself raising the questions. Why should we read? What should we read? And how should we read? It is neither superfluous nor idle to raise these questions. I had accepted invitations several times to the home of a well-to-do family enjoying a good position abroad, a household which had a certain standing in the aristocratic life of a capital city. When it struck me one day that I had never seen any bookcase or bookshelves in the house. In reply to my query, I was told that they had no bookcase nor any books, except the two or three that lay on the sitting room table. But you read, or have read a good deal? I asked. Oh, yes, was the answer. We travel much, as you know, and in the course of the year we buy a great many books, but we always leave them behind in the net, meaning the net of the railway carriages. And by way of explanation, you see, one never reads a book more than once. I should have caused great astonishment, I suppose, had I replied that in the domain of reading, if in no other, it is regarded as a changeless rule that one time is no time at all, that a man who restricts himself to one reading of a good book knows little about it. The books I value, I have frequently read, more than 10 times. Indeed, in many cases, I could not possibly say how many times. One does not really know a book until one knows it almost by heart. It is a good thing, too, if one has the means to own one's books. There are people who do not own any books, although they have the means. I was once invited abroad to the house of a certain Maecenas, Maecenas, a man whose art collections are worth considerably more than $1 million. And when I had viewed his pictures, I said, "Now, I should like to see the books. Where are they?" He replied somewhat testily, "I do not collect books." He had none. There are people who are content, as to books, with the provision afforded them by circulating libraries. A sorry method at best. It is a sure sign of failing culture and poor taste when at every watering place in a great country like Germany, expensively dressed women are invariably seen each with a greasy novel from a circulating library in her hand. This guy's kind of a book snob, isn't he? These ladies who would be ashamed to borrow a dress or wear second-hand clothes do not hesitate to economize in buying in book buying. As a result, they read one novel after another, and the last supplements all knowledge of those that have gone before. Even rich people have seldom the affection for a book that makes them be bound so that the binding corresponds with the contents and with the owner's personal taste. The man who replied, "I do not collect books," saw no necessity for reading. He belonged to the wealthy bourgeoisie class, and men of that class rarely have the time and the concentration for reading anything but newspapers. Outside the ranks of scholars, a strong and passionate love for reading is felt, in the main, only by those who have neither the time nor the means for it. The lower middle classes, artisans and workmen, among these latter there is still to be found that thirst for education which distinguished the wealthy bourgeoisie classes 100 years ago, though it was so quickly slacked. Why do we read? That is therefore the question that requires an answer first. I do not overestimate the knowledge that can be acquired through reading. In many cases, it is necessarily only a poor apology for direct knowledge of the world and of life. It is of more use to travel widely than to read detailed and comprehensive descriptions of travels. You learn to know men better by observing them in real life than by investigating them in books. I will go still further and say that sculptures, paintings, and drawings, when they are the work of the greatest artists, are profoundly more instructive than the great majority of books. Michelangelo, Titan, Vasquez, butchered that one, Rembrandt, have taught me more concerning humanity than whole libraries of books. As a rule, books are only to be considered as presenting a theory. As a doctor must study his case and cannot obtain his knowledge by reading, thus we cannot learn anything from books unless we learn also from life. If we have no knowledge of mankind, we cannot even enjoy a novel. We are not in a position to judge whether it gives a true or a false picture of things as they are. As proof of this, we need only recall the many foolish remarks with which, in the course of the year, one hears good books dismissed. Nobody would feel or act like that, is the offhand verdict of one person or another who has known only a small circle of people and never understood anything of what was going on in the minds of those around him. Such persons term a book poor and unreal because it happens to be outside the reality with which they themselves happen to be acquainted. A reality which is to actual reality what a duck pond is to the ocean. We are not to believe, then, that we can attain to any wisdom simply by devouring books. Many qualifications are necessary merely to understand and make one's own the fraction of wisdom that a good book may contain. qualifications derived from life. Hydrate. On the other hand, it is also true that books have certain advantages which men have not. They set thoughts in motion, which men seldom do. They are silent when questions are not asked of them. Men are seldom so discreet. Recall how often you have received visits from intrusive, troublesome people. Yet the 7,000 or 8,000 volumes in my study have never been a trouble to me, often a pleasure. And books are seldom as inane as people. One feels frequently like applying to the mass of humanity those words of Goethe: if they were books, I would not read them. If I may be permitted an exceedingly trite observation, we ought also to read so as to add to our own experience those of other men, greater and more competent than ourselves. We ought to read because in science the work and investigation of centuries is presented to us in a clear, condensed form, and because in literature we meet with a peculiar beauty and with beauty loving personalities that we can learn to know in no other way. Reading has power to make us keener and more susceptible to the values of things. Furthermore, if reading affords no more than innocent entertainment, it is worthwhile in the wearisomeness and monotonous exertion of daily life. Books of pure entertainment are by no means to be despised, so long as they do really amuse. Many will add that we should read to become better men and women, and demand in consequence that stress should be laid upon exhortatory books at the expense of the rest of literature. Literature must be moral, they will say, and operate morally. Books must be sermons. Far be it from me to deny that one may grow better through reading, but whether one does or does not depends chiefly upon how one reads, and we have not arrived at that question. As a rule, we may say that nothing in the world improves one less than sermonizing books and conversations. Nothing is more wearisome, quite apart from the fact that nothing is more inartistic. Just as you cannot train a child by constant scolding, neither can you develop character by everlasting preaching. Moralizing means beneficially exposing acts, sometimes an example, but only that. And the moralizing book is no example. Everyone knows the precepts he was taught in childhood: not to act selfishly or think basely, not to lie or cheat or injure or kill. We all know these precepts so well that they make no impression upon us, even when we see them illustrated in poetical compositions. We ought not to demand of an author that he should work to make us better. That would be laying too heavy a burden upon him. All that we can demand of him is that he work conscientiously and that he have it in him to teach us something. Notice that all the author is always a him. Also, we can avoid the books that would debase us. But that leads to our second question. What should we read? What do we read? Newspapers? No one will deny that newspaper reading has become a necessity to us all, and that the papers rapidly and occasionally conscientiously impart knowledge, though it is true of a very scattered kind. Day after day they teach us all sort of interesting things and point the way to much other reading. No sooner are we out of bed in the morning than we must have our newspaper whirling us round through Europe, Africa, Asia, and America. An editor might say, as the ditty has it, I whirl my hens 6 or 7 times round. Never heard of that ditty. And at the same time, he fills his readers up with various items of the day's news. Often we get the interesting information that Mr. Jensen, the broker, is stopping in the country at Orthdrup, or that Mr. Larson, the painter, is spending the summer in the district of Horn. In reading the papers, we yield to the leisure to see our own opinions, sometimes little else than prejudices instilled into us by others, expressed and advocated in print better than we ourselves could ever do. The foolish newspapers, foolish readers expect, moreover, partly to be crammed with all sorts of private scandal, partly to see those politicians or literary men whose views are opposed to theirs, and therefore unpopular, properly ground down. This last is a peculiarly Danish relaxation. The acknowledged good nature of the Danish people was counterbalanced by the extraordinarily pronounced petty malice. That's interesting. As other nations enjoy bullfights, cockfights, and boxers' bleeding noses, so the Danish public take delight in every sort of private persecution and private scandal published in their press. Sounds like pretty much everywhere today. There are only two things one would wish for newspaper readers: that they might read their favorite papers with some exercise of the faculty of criticism, and be not so satisfied with newspaper reading as to incapacitate them for any other. At the beginning of this article, I set about the task of controverting the opinion that any definite number of books can be designated as the best books for every one. There is among the books one that is generally regarded as the most suitable of all for general and constant reading, the very best book, the Bible. Few books, however, prove so conclusively as this that the bulk of mankind cannot read at all. The so-called Old Testament comprises, as is well known, all that is left to us of the ancient Hebrew literature of a period of 800 years, together with some few books in Greek. It includes writings of the most varied value and the most varied origin, which have come down to us with text comparatively recently edited, often corrupt and further marred by endless copyings. Writings ascribed as a rule to men who never wrote them, nearly all of them difficult to understand, and demanding extensive historical knowledge in order to be read with the smallest degree of profit. Certain of the books of the Old Testament, like the collection which bears the name of Isaiah, contains some of the sublimest extant poetry of antiquity, a witness to the purest cravings for righteousness, the highest religious development to be found on earth at that time, 750 or 500 years before our era. Others, as for example the Chronicles, are of little value and contain mostly sacerdotal falsifications of historical events. All that in Protestant countries is given into the hands of everybody, and numbers of human beings have throughout the centuries found edification not only in beautiful legends, but in the least edifying stories, like that of King David. The common people believe that he was the author of Psalms, which he never wrote, and of which the reader does not understand the half. There is much evidence that such reading confuses men's minds. Pause for hydration. Yet, if the acknowledged best book cannot be called good for everyone, then how much less the classics? In the majority of well-to-do homes, the so-called classical works are to be found on every bookcase. But it is surprisingly true that they stand there principally for show, are seldom or never read, and give but little pleasure when they are read, because it is a mere chance whether they are understood. The classical writers wrote for earlier generations, and their works contain, as a rule, a good deal that is alien to the generations that have arisen after them. For this reason, it is perhaps best to begin with books written for those now living. Pardon me. Young people will quite understand these, and the way will be prepared for the great writers of the past. Again, the classics not infrequently stand upon people's bookshelves as involuntary witnesses to their owner's lack of individuality. Often the purchaser has had no personal affection for them, and has them only because his social position requires it. It is true that in this way he often comes to have good books, but the credit of the selection is only in a very small measure his own, and the good books are generally of the past, rarely of the present. The average man's mind is yeah, this word, I even looked it up, inimical to new thoughts and new forms. Geniuses in their lifetime, if they do not live to be very old, always have the majority against them. It is not at all surprising that they live and die unrecognized. The amazing thing is that they should occasionally be recognized. When they are, the recognition is partly due to the turning of a page, partly due to the fact that what is truly excellent operates with a strange, compelling force. The good, in the mass, has a corrosive action upon the mediocre. It eats its way through. A few connoisseurs, judges of art, proclaim the worth of the good book so loud and long that they frighten the snobbish into the fear of being called stupid if they scoff any longer. And although and altogether act in a regularly hypnotic manner on the popular mind, so that people believe they think the good is good, and in time familiarize themselves with it, and at last really think it good. It is, of course, right to aim at a common, solid educational basis to put into a child's hands fairy tales, Robinson Crusoe, the Odyssey, to let a boy or girl read Walter Scott and a young man make acquaintance with Falstaff and Don Quixote. Young people of both sexes soon learn to know, too, what is accessible to them in Shakespeare and Goethe. It is, however, a sign that individuality is lacking when people's favorite authors and favorite books lie so seldom off the beaten track. Occasionally, the reverse happens. Gibbon, for instance, is no longer generally read. Yet I know a German painter and poet who has read with enjoyment not once but many times the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. Gibbon's wide vision, great intellectual freedom, and extraordinary descriptive power give his works lasting value, and to this reader, Gibbon is the master of historical writing. In Denmark, Christian Zartmann, the painter, has read Lenora Christina's Memoirs of My Misery for years, over and over again, with such absorption that the life of the poor imprisoned princess has grown to be part of him, inspiring long series of original and important pictures. We ought to read what is of most value to us, as he has read that book. There is unfortunately little of such forcible originality and singularity amongst us. But, you will ask, how am I to find the good books that are to appeal directly to me? It will be as hard to indicate an infallible way of finding such books as to lay down rules for making the acquaintance of the pleasantest and most profitable people one could know. All that can be done is to utter warnings against methods that do not lead in the right direction. There are people who do not think it necessary to read books themselves because they can get information of their contents in other ways. Many prefer a general survey of things, believing they see most when they see most widely, and seize eagerly on the compendious class of books which begin with the creation of the world and end with their own times, the so-called literary histories of the world. This is exactly the sort of book you should beware of. No one man is capable of writing such a book, and as such books go, they are far more likely to stupefy than to instruct. The author of such a literary history of the world speaks familiarly of writings in 100 languages, with which it is impossible that he could have more than a slight acquaintance. If he had begun to read before he was born, and had never done anything else, never enjoyed life, never slept, never eaten or drunk, but only read until he published his book, he would not have had time to read more than a very small portion of the books he mentions and discusses. He can only know most incompletely himself that which he strives to impart to others, and his teaching will be incomplete like his knowledge. A book which is really to instruct. Actually, I think I'll stop there. That's where we'll pick up here in the next video. Yep, that's where we'll stop. Because this book doesn't seem to have chapters in it. So, this will be the end of video 1 of part 1, I guess, of Little Blue Book number 86, titled On Reading, written by George Brandis. Thanks for listening, and join me in part 2.